In the early days of Arda, before the world was fully shaped, the Dark Lord Morgoth waged a terrible war against the Valar, his brethren, and he was confident that his victory was nigh. He knew that he had the upper hand in this war, and that the Valar's defeat was only a matter of time. Yet something would happen that would change the outcome of this war. A new arrival, a new Vala, called Tulkas. He was the last of the Ainur to descend into Arda, and the world echoed with the sound of his laughter as he tore through the heavens. Morgoth now faced a terrible new foe, whose fury terrified him to his core, and he was too afraid to face him in battle, choosing instead to flee and hide in the outer darkness of Ea. He would have to bide his time until he could return to Arda, waiting for the perfect opportunity to present itself. And in his absence, the world of Arda was able to flourish and enjoy many years of peace. Hey guys, it's Carl here, and in today's episode, we'll be exploring the story of Tulkas, the Vala. So out of all the Vala, Tulkas was the strongest when it came to physical strength, and he was so swift that he could outrun all the living beings and creatures in Arda, which is actually why he never rode upon a horse. His hair and beard were golden in color, and he would never use a weapon in battle, for he preferred to rely on his deadly fists. His skill in battle was fueled by his tireless nature, and Morgoth was always wary and terrified of facing him upon the battlefield. It was clear that Tulkas relished the thrill of battle, and contests of strength such as wrestling, and we know that he would always laugh in sports and war. I find it really interesting how Tolkien mentions that Tulkas would always laugh whenever he faced Morgoth in battle, before the elves had awakened. And I wonder if it was intentional on Tolkien's part to specify the awakening of the elves. Perhaps it was to show that Tulkas became more serious in his later encounters with Morgoth, which could stem from the evil lies, deceptions and deeds that he had inflicted upon the elves. After all, Tulkas was said to be slow to anger, but also very slow to forget. And so I feel that it's quite a plausible theory, though I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Now after Morgoth was driven to the dark outskirts of Ea, the rest of the Valar had the great task of repairing and completing the world, and they raised 2 mighty lamps upon pillars to fill Arda with light. When all of their tasks were finally complete, the Valar held a magnificent feast, in which Tulkas married the Vala Nessa, and it was now time for them to rest and watch their work slowly unfold and grow. All of these creations had left Tulkas exhausted, for his strength had been crucial in shaping Arda, and he would now fall asleep and rest, content with all that he had achieved. Peace, order, bliss, soon to be shattered, for Morgoth was watching and waiting in the dark confines of the universe, and with Tulkas asleep, his hour of return had finally come. He snuck past the walls of night, and Morgoth entered the far northern lands of Middle-earth without alerting the Valar. Here he would set up a vast fortress, deep beneath the dark mountains in secret, which he called Utumno, and his evil began to seep out and poison the land. Trees fell sick and rotted, rivers were choked with slime and weed, and the forests grew dark and perilous, terrible haunts of fear. Even the beasts were not spared, for under his influence they became twisted monsters of horn and ivory that dyed the earth with blood. This growing malice and corruption would alert the Valar to Morgoth's presence, and they knew that he must be at work again, and so they sought out his hiding place. Yet Morgoth chose to strike first, before the Valar could prepare for war or find his fortress, and he cast down the pillars that held the lamps of Arda, and they came crashing to the ground. Middle-earth was left in ruin, for the fire of these lamps spilled across the lands, scarring them, and Morgoth fled in the sudden confusion and darkness to his fortress of Utumno. Tulkas was furious at the destruction that had just taken place, and he tried to chase after Morgoth. Though Morgoth would manage to reach Utumno before Tulkas could overtake him, and the Valar could not assault his fortress just yet. They would have to dedicate the vast majority of their strength to restraining the chaos and turmoil that was spreading across Arda from the lamp's destruction, and they were frightened that if they attacked Morgoth's forces, they might cause further damage to the land, which could compromise the awakening of the elves. And so the Valar decided to bide their time and wait until the elves had awoken, and they went to live in the land of Aman to the west of Middle-earth. This plan wasn't entirely to Tulkas' liking, for he paid very little attention to the past and present, and he was determined to wage war against Morgoth as soon as possible to end his rule over the land. He would have to wait patiently for the elves' awakening, and when that time finally arrived, the Valar waged a terrible war upon Morgoth's forces, and Tulkas' spirits were lifted at the chance of overthrowing him. This war would leave the northwestern lands of Middle-earth completely broken and in ruin, though the Valar would eventually emerge victorious and they broke through the gates of Utumno. Morgoth would try to hide from his reckoning in the deepest, darkest pits of his fortress, yet the Valar would manage to corner him, and Tulkas came forth as their champion and he wrestled Morgoth to the ground, binding him in the chain called Anganor that was handcrafted by Aule, the smith of the Valar. Morgoth was then dragged to Aman and imprisoned for 3 entire ages, though the Valar would eventually show him mercy and they freed him after he begged for their pardon, and he vowed to help them in all of their works and to heal all of the damage that he had caused. This didn't sit well with Tulkas, for he never forgave Morgoth for his evil and he never trusted him. And whenever Morgoth walked past him in Valinor, Tulkas would clench his fists in anger. It would turn out that Tulkas was right to distrust him, for while he was in Valinor, Morgoth was spreading lies among the Noldor elves, and he even managed to turn some of them against the Valar. And when the Valar learnt of this deception, they immediately sent out Tulkas to bring his old foe to justice, though no matter how hard he searched, he was unable to find him. Morgoth had managed to evade capture as he hid in Aman, and he would lie low for a while, until one night he suddenly appeared in Formenos to convince Feanor to turn against the Valar. Even though it's clear that some of Morgoth's words would later influence Feanor, he failed to bring him to his side, for Feanor saw through his deception and how Morgoth lusted for the Silmarils, and so he cursed him and he sent him away from his land. When news of Morgoth's appearance reached the Valar, they believed that his plan was to escape to his old fortress of Utumno to rebuild his strength, and so Tulkas and Orome were quickly sent out to pursue and overtake him, though Morgoth would manage to deceive them once more, for he secretly turned back and chose to travel to the southern region of Aman, to the region of Avatar, near the eastern feet of the Pelori Mountains. A terrible being lived in these dark lands, known as Ungoliant, and she took the form of a monstrous spider that hungered for light, and she spun webs of inescapable darkness. Using his cunning, Morgoth would convince her to ally with him, and she created a cloud of darkness which hid them from their enemies, and they used it to travel to Valinor, where they poisoned the 2 trees, while the Valar were having a great feast. Since the 2 trees were poisoned, their light faded, and a great darkness fell upon Valinor. Only Manwë was able to see through this darkness, and he witnessed a dark cloud moving to the north with great speed. And in that moment, he knew that Morgoth had managed to enter and leave Valinor. Tulkas and Orome were sent out to chase this dark cloud, yet the moment they entered it, Tulkas was blinded by darkness and he stood powerless, trying to beat the air in vain. By the time this darkness had passed, it was too late for them to catch up with Morgoth, and Tulkas would have to return to Valinor empty-handed. Now there was some hope that the 2 trees of Valinor could be healed, for the 3 Silmarils contained their light, and so the Valar asked Feanor to give them up in order to heal them. This was a great thing to ask of him, for the 3 Silmarils were his most precious creation, and for a while Feanor fell silent. In his impatience, Tulkas cried out, "Speak, O Noldor, yea or nay, but who shall deny Yavanna? And did not the light of the Silmarils come from her work in the beginning?" Though these words did not help to convince Feanor, for he felt that he was surrounded by enemies that desired the Silmarils. Unfortunately, even if Feanor wanted to give up the Silmarils, he couldn't really do so at that point, for Morgoth had actually stolen the Silmarils from his treasury and slain his father, though that is a story for another time. There is a prophecy that claims that Morgoth would eventually return in Dagor Dagorath, the apocalypse of Arda, and he would gather his servants once more to wage war against the Valar. It is said that during this battle, Tulkas would fight Morgoth, and he would play a big part in his defeat, though Morgoth's eventual death would not come at Tulkas' hands, but those of Turin, a hero of men reborn. Anyway guys, this wraps up the story of Tulkas and I hope you enjoyed it. How do you feel about Tulkas' character, and is he your favorite Vala? In my case, he's probably among my top 3 Valar. I just love the way the character works, you know, how he laughs in the face of Morgoth. In war, he's just like an old Viking warrior, a simple guy who's strong and he's great in battle, you know. I love that sort of personality, and it's really cool having that sort of human element to the Valar. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this character. Where do you like him, his personality traits and all of that, so please share them in the comments below.